Everyone, Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Gerber, Denominational Minister for Youth and Young Adults for Mennonite Church USA, and the editor of The Gathering Place, which is an interactive website for Anabaptist youth leaders to learn, be, and connect. You can join the Gathering Place community at www.thegatheringplace.us. Every month at The Gathering Place, we talk about a different theme. And this month, we have the privilege of talking about contemporary Anabaptist witness. What does this mean in this 21st century? How do we engage peacemaking today? And to this end, I am so thrilled to have on our Gathering Place live podcast a chance to interview and talk with Steve Thomas, who is a longtime pastor, over 30 years experience. Currently, he's a transition minister at First Mennonite Church in Indianapolis, and he's the founder of Peacemakers Academy, which was created for public school systems to empower kids to resist bullying through the combination of using martial arts and conflict transformation. So fascinating program, and Steve, we are thrilled to have you today talk about bullying, what it is, how to empower our kids, and how to take a peaceful approach to it. So welcome to The Gathering Place. It's great to have you here today. And I'm just wondering if we can just go ahead and you want to just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and like what got you interested in sort of this relationship between peacemaking and conflict transformation and bullying. Can you give us a little bit of background history about how the Peacemakers Academy got started?
Well, I see that Merle is on our conversation here. It probably goes back to our mod. Merle, along with other mod mates, were rough and tough, and so I had to learn on our floor how to deal with aggression and bullying at school. Merle's shaking his head. Actually, it goes back before that. I have lots of experience of being bullied in elementary school, and as being a Mennonite boy, I was taught just to take it, to ignore it. Bully will go away, but he didn't, and so I had a lot of bad experience in my early school years of being bullied, and along the way would end up later on in middle school and high school getting into a couple of fights, ending up in the emergency room, and all along the way wondering there's got to be a better way for dealing with bullying, dealing with conflict and aggression in our lives. And one thing led to another, and it was in one of my courses at seminary when John Howard Yoder in a War, Peace, Non-Resistance class suggested that Mennonites learn martial arts, that he sowed a seed that would take root in our congregation in a mission group when we were training in martial arts together, several of us, and we hatched this idea of using martial arts to help make peace and to empower kids to resist bullying at school and to reform those who have issues with anger and aggression. They'll learn discipline, respect, self-control, and to take and use the best of martial arts to empower kids who are being bullied, kids who are engaging in bullying, and also to invite students who are bystanders in conflict to intervene, to be able to make peace so that school situations could feel safe, where good learning could happen and kids can enjoy going to school. Because for years I didn't enjoy going to school because of the bullying. So it began a lot of my own personal history of pain.
Yeah. So what do you say to those folks that consider martial arts as violent or a sort of a non-peacemaking process? Can you tell us a little bit about why martial arts? Like why did John Howard Yoder say that, or what led to that?
Well, the first I heard him mention that idea in our course, it seemed like a crazy idea. Why use violence to stop violence if we are committed to the way of peace? And so it didn't make sense until years later, when studying martial arts, would realize that what we see in the movies, that people's popular conceptions are largely based on media presentations of martial arts, fighting arts, whereas the best of martial arts tradition really embody a philosophy of nonviolence and teach specific techniques as a way of controlling aggression in ways that are meant to make peace. And specifically, the art that John Howard Yoder would often refer to is the art of Aikido, which translates the art of peace. And where Sensei Yeshiba, the particular founder of that school, was actually taught children and youth his form of martial arts, Aikido, as a way of actually forming a culture of peace. And so Aikido, along with other arts, really are about empowering people to live in ways of nonviolence rather than to engage in violence.
That's really interesting. So can you tell us then a little bit about your curriculum that you started with this Peacemakers Academy and that you wrote to go along with that? How do you actually engage the students, or can you just sort of step us through that?
Well, our work began in our local Boys and Girls Club of Goshen, Indiana. We were invited as a congregation to reach kids who were at risk in the community of being engaged in gangs, drugs, violence. And so martial arts has a real appeal to certain children and youth. And so we used the Boys and Girls Club as a place within the community, outside the church, to engage youth in their setting. And we would run a program there for 4 years, teaching basic Taekwondo, the art that I train and teach in. And one thing would lead to another, where after the Boys and Girls Club, we would eventually be able to construct our own academy, which we would name Peacemakers Academy. And so we would teach traditional martial arts, but we would infuse in the training teachings and techniques on conflict transformation. And then over the years, we would develop our own curriculum, outlining exercises and lesson plans, material that could be incorporated in a traditional martial arts class. That also led then to running this at Oaklawn Psychiatric Center for 9 years. So I taught this curriculum there, working with children and youth in their intensive inpatient program, using martial arts in the program as a way of helping people get into their body, because often trauma or injury happens there, and so using more of an embodied pathway of bringing healing and growth and learning into the lives of children and youth. So we used our academy as an after-school program to go along with a program that we eventually develop and run within 3 school buildings, working with 4th and 5th graders once a week through the school year. And then we had evening classes open to anyone in the community, both for youth and adults. And then we would take and also use this periodically kind of standalone workshops or series in congregations. So trying to use the curriculum and to deliver it in a variety of ways at the academy, in schools, Oaklawn, and in churches and other organizations in the community.
That's great. So maybe let's just back up a little bit. Can you tell me about, do you have any stats on bullying? Who does it touch? Do you see any sort of patterns with that? And you said something about drugs and gangs. How do they all tie together regarding bullying and ways of coming to that?
I'm just turning to the preface in our teacher manual, going back to stats. In 2010, I'm not sure what they are now, but roughly the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services find that just under 30% of students have been in a physical fight, 23 have been bullied on school property, and 18% of students in Indiana have carried a weapon at school in the last 30 days. And so and that 1 out of 3 students roughly experiences bullying in some way, as either being bullied, being the target, or the one engaging in bullying as the aggressor. Those are kind of the stats that are given. It's very much more pervasive than most people realize. In gangs, the prevalence of gangs, difficult to measure. Years ago in the city of Goshen, we had someone from outside the community come in to do an assessment and said we had a gang problem, but it's more of a quiet presence because it's about running drugs and they don't want to call attention to themselves. But there's been a lot of violence between some gangs. The high school that I went to, Concord High School, close to Goshen, one of our instructors works in the cafeteria, and they say they have on average 1 fight every week in the high school cafeteria, and most of it's gang related. And so we were wanting to use our program, and the psychiatrist that we consulted with, who has the School for Martial and Meditative Arts, I consulted with him in the beginning because he found that in his studies, martial arts provides a positive alternative to gangs, because martial arts, with its training and its system, has some of the same appeal of what kids are looking for a gang, so it becomes a positive alternative. So the city of Goshen actually funded our program to reach out specifically to 5th and 6th graders who are being targeted by gang recruitment, and identified by the school system, enrolled in our after-school program, in linking gang activity with children.
Wow. And what kind of results have you seen?
They're difficult to measure. What we have observed and what teachers and guidance counselors report, that when the kids are engaging in training in a sustained way, it typically brings their confidence up. They feel more kind of empowered to be able to face into problems, do problem solving, deal with interpersonal conflicts, and what that does then to impact their self-esteem. For example, we like to tell the story of Blake, who gives us permission to tell his story. As a 5th grader in the school just down the street from the congregation where I pastored for years, he was frequently bullied, and he just carried himself very slowly. He would walk with his head down. He felt very poorly about himself, wasn't doing well in school. And then it happened at one time when this guy who would frequently bully Blake on the playground came up to him. Blake stood back into what we call our safe stance that we teach him. He engaged the person who was bullying him in a safe, assertive stance, and by standing up for himself, that created a turn. The person who was bullying him left him alone from that point. His parents wrote us a letter saying that his chin came back up, and his teacher sent us a letter saying that it really impacted his ability to pay attention, be engaged at school, and his grades came up. And the school principal, who actually witnessed this altercation on the playground and saw how Blake handled himself, invited us to come to the school there to begin working with students after school, and that was the beginning of our work in school system, coming as a result of the principal there witnessing how one of our students was able to stand up for himself in a way that was respectful but assertive, and created a turn in the student's relationship.
That's wonderful. I mean, I'm sure that this program has touched countless lives, but it's worth it even if it touches and changes that one. Like Blake. I mean, that's a beautiful story on how something that is so heartbreaking every day to learn and to be able to empower a student to not only stand up for himself, but then how that then changes the rest of his school day and what he can engage in and how he can learn and be present. So
That happened back in 2002 or 3, I believe. And just last month, a contractor working on our retreat house who knew this Blake said, "I want you to know, Steve, that as a student later on in years, he actually would go so far one time when kids were being bullied in the neighborhood to actually intervene and be a peacemaker." And he said that he attributes what Blake did largely to his experience in our academy, our mentoring him, and we're not only standing up for himself, but then inserted himself into this situation of bullying in a positive way for peace as a bystander, and that just kind of warmed my heart to realize kind of the impact. On the other side of the problem, we like to tell the story of Jason, who also gives us permission to tell his story, who, when he was in middle school, averaged a fight a week in the neighborhood or at school, and was frequently disciplined at school and eventually expelled from school, and then enrolled in our program. Through the course of working with Jason, who came from a pretty abusive home, he was simply coming to school and reacting out of place of pain and anger, acting aggressively, simply just meeting out what he received at home. And we were able to reach him, and through the course of a couple of years of mentoring him, he was able to successfully re-enter and graduate from school. And at one point, he admitted to us that he wanted to train in Taekwondo to advance in rank, become a better fighter. We were kind of aware of some of his mixed motives, but we stayed with him. And at a certain point, I believe it's for his green belt test, in his essay that he had to present upon receiving his green belt, he actually confessed he began training with the intent of learning to be a better fighter. But he said that in the course of this, he learned that fighting's not the answer, and that his incidents went down dramatically. And he said that as a result of what he learned, he stopped doing drugs. And so we were really delighted to hear his story. He would eventually stop, I don't know, probably about his blue belt level. But then sometime after high school, he came back to our academy with his girlfriend and child, and we'd have that pattern just simply stopping by to connect with us. There was a relationship that was formed, and for us, that's what it's about. There's the training, learning and teaching the skills. There's also that relationship, that mentoring of companioning a kid, who needs, someone to mentor him, and hence we'd like to think that really is the thing that works more than anything else.
Absolutely, it leads to that glue, which is what it's really all about, is relationship and touching other lives and forming those deep bonds. So that's awesome. Now, I noticed in the curriculum that you created, it's broken into 3 different parts, which is pursuing peace, managing oneself, and engaging others. Can you tell us a little bit about why those 3 sections and sort of what the take is between each?
The first section on pursuing peace is simply kind of lays out the groundwork, or kind of the fundamentals of thinking about peace, respect, esteem, conflict, violence, nonviolence. So it just kind of lays a foundation, but it's really the second and the third sections are learning how, in the second section, how to manage oneself, of having an awareness of how you're reacting in a conflict, and then focusing on courage, self-control, confidence, some of the things that martial arts teaches at the core, along with respect. And what these actually look like in practice, and teaching very specific skills for managing yourself to be able to control fear, anger, and aggression in conflict. And then engaging others, it's a section on basic communication and problem-solving skills. And we have exercises in every lesson coupled with martial arts skills, and then a story, and then we engaged Aaron Ratzloff, Mennonite cartoonist to actually create a cartoon strip for every lesson. So in our student manual, we try to reduce the concepts and skills in a very simple way and to illustrate it with a cartoon for our students. That's kind of the sequence. And then all of the last session is kind of formed looking at character, where we focus on endurance, strength, love, reverence, and being a peaceable person in life. That's kind of the flow of the program.
I love what you have here. I think it's just so well written and so well rounded. And I wish everybody had a had a copy of this. And I will
make it available. I mean, we
Sure.
have it as a copy left provision where people are free to copy and use it however they like. And so we're happy to circulate PDF versions of the manuals. In the school program, all students would actually get a hard copy kind of workbook, and then the teacher manual. And I should say that while it began with martial arts, as we developed the program to be run in our public school system, educators were asking, do you have to be a martial artist to actually lead this? And that led to us to actually rework the curriculum so it's not dependent upon martial art skills. And so the manual is actually written more for an educator. And drawing on some skills, some pieces of martial arts, but it's not. It doesn't require that.
Yeah, that's a really helpful caveat to say that anyone can pick it up and lead it in their context. So at the Gathering Place, we're a group of pastors, youth pastors, faith formers, parents, and so what would you say to let's just say a youth pastor or a parent that comes to you and says, my kid is struggling, but I don't necessarily have time to get into the whole of the curriculum that you have here, or my kid's just not at the place right now where he or she's going to sit down and we can work it through together. What would you say to that parent? Like, what would be some next steps on how to help that child attend to a bullying issue?
Well, one, to realize that they're not alone. That's a very pervasive problem, and there are a few things that get to a parent more than when his or her child's being bullied at school. And so this request has frequently come from parents. And so what we like to do, especially if children, parents are in a congregation, is maybe think could we actually come into your congregation and do a workshop? And so I have frequently done a series within congregations working with youth groups. We also have built on this to actually do safety trainings to actually empower women to resist sexual assault. So at the congregation I'm serving here in Indianapolis, we did one last year. We're looking at doing another one in the larger community as a bit of a head turner to say, coming back to your very theme of the opening up on Anabaptist peacemaking, to take real-world violence seriously and to provide alternatives to violence. It's kind of as an aside, so empowering women to resist physical or sexual assault is another piece that we do. Anyway, so we have some of these things packed, a package in kind of a standalone or a series of workshops to be run in congregational settings, either with youth or mixed youth and adults. I just led one in our congregation this past Sunday.
Oh, neat. So what do you say to me as a parent who has a first grader that, comes home sometimes, really bad day, altercation happened on the playground. I admit it, my first reaction is, go find someone else to play with, or, turn the other cheek. Like what do you advise, for parents who find themselves with children who are struggling?
Well, first, I don't think Jesus had in mind for a child to turn the other cheek when being bullied at school. We could spend a whole hour just talking about what Jesus meant by by turning the other cheek. I largely draw on the work of Walter Wink for understanding that those difficult texts in Matthew 5:38 and following. But so, first of all, we would say it's very important, because if your son is being picked on, targeted, bullying, it's likely happening to other kids too. And to be sure to report that to the school. The school wants to or needs to understand that that's happening, and so they can really monitor that. So it's because it may well be a pattern of behavior and not just something that your child is experiencing. And so we teach that hitting back, that talking back is never the answer. What that does to escalate. While ignoring may be appropriate, most of the time we talk about kind of engaging somebody in ways that are confident and respectful, or the word we use is we talk about being assertive, rather than being submissive and simply taking it, rather than being aggressive and striking back, which your child together with the person who is doing the bullying, they both end up in trouble. The school doesn't differentiate like, well, who started it? Right. Both are in trouble if you strike back. But to be rather than being submissive or aggressive, ways that are really being assertive, being strong and respectful and confident, and trying to find the way of engaging someone who's disrespecting or mistreating you or others. And so we try to work at. That's what we try to work at in our program.
Those are some really good tips on what does it mean to be assertive. I like it how you said that, to still have that self-respect, that you do, deserve to be treated fairly or respectfully, and to stand up for that. Yeah. And what about if we flip that and you find out you have a bullier, or someone in your youth group is bullying, and even nowadays, it's not just necessarily on the playground. I mean, it's a cyber, it's cyberbullying. You hear so many stories of that, even to the point where some youth are committing suicide because they just feel like their life is unraveling because of the cyberbullying that's happening. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, what we do at the beginning of every lesson, when we actually are teaching, whether it's in the classroom or in our academy, we're running a class, when students come to attention and assume this stance at the beginning of a class, they actually bow to each other, and is kind of based on kind of the Indian greeting Namaste. The divine or the God of me greets the mute. It's about recognizing, but it's a martial arts gesture of respect. And so then we have these kind of ritualized ways of actually trying to teach and form respect, and helping someone who, for example, is disrespectful, angry, and aggressive in his or her treatment of other, to recognize other for who she or he is. And we teach that all of us are to be treated with respect based on who we are, and then from a faith perspective, we'll often say that from our faith perspective, we believe that we're created in the image of God, which makes us all beloved children of God. That makes us all one family together, in this way of trying to teach respect and what that means and looks like, and try to define what disrespect is. The things that we say, how we relate, how we exclude other kids. And then in terms of our cyber presence, recognizing how especially damaging that is, because once it's out there, it can't be taken back, and how quickly it can spread. And as you've touched on, the whole increasing problem of bullycide, where it's become so painful, the violence is so great that it actually leads kids to that desperate point where they take their own lives. Mm-hmm. I think the problem is significant enough that we ought to describe it and make it a new ism. When we think of whether it's sexism, militarism, we think of these things that are very significant social problems, and I'm wondering if we might make the whole problem of bullying into a new ism. I describe it as shameism. That is aggressive behavior that is meant to make others feel small, to make them worthless, helpless, hopeless. You know, it's behavior that humiliates others, puts people down, and puts them in a place of dishonor and disgrace. And so one of the things that I'm wondering if might want to do is really to help reframe the problem and make it more serious than it's often portrayed. That it's not just boys will be boys, girls will be girls. That we're engaging in something that can be akin like whether it's in cyberspace or at school, like shame campaigns. Where people are singled out and they're marked, they're tagged. Whether it's Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. Tagging a woman with a large A, or Jews being tagged by the clothes they wore, or at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, when the kids who would eventually strike back were tagged with ketchup when they were publicly shamed and humiliated, and then eventually strike back as they did in 1999 in Littleton, Colorado. These are the kind of incidents that follow after bullying when it's not taken seriously enough. And so now schools are catching on, recognizing it has to be taken seriously, and there are huge liability issues that are now getting their attention.
Right, and how would you define a difference between bullying and just picking on? Is there a difference between that, or
bullying
saying something
as opposed to picking on? If it's just something like an isolated incident that happens between two kids, that's not necessarily bullying. What makes it bullying is when it happens repeatedly. It's a pattern, and generally where one is in a position of power over and against another, and there's intent to actually harm, to humiliate, to hurt, in that kind of targeting behavior. So it happens over time. It's repeated. There's a power imbalance, and it's meant to hurt or harm others.
Merle, do you have any questions for Steve?
Yeah, two things. One, the whole theme of retaliation is something that I feel is insidious. It's such a widespread and complex issue. When it comes to bullying, we often see how retaliation comes out, and we think of it more as in a physical response. Of course, it's emotional. It's a variety of ways, but it just feels like, as Christians, and I think especially in young people, it really is. We sometimes, I think, approve of certain types of retaliation. And I wonder how do you engage with the broad aspect of retaliation, not just in the physical encounters, but in how we relate. And is that a fairly intentional? Is there a section on just retaliation itself, or is that just something that you feel has its fingers in so much of your peacemaker's work? You understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a basic instinctive reaction. When we think about the fight-flight reaction, to flee or fight, when one is hurt, when one is threatened, to strike back. That's one of the two instinctive reactions driven by fear and anger. So we talk about, as a matter of principle, that when you strike back as an act of revenge, what you do, you are one, it's a form of aggression. It's not respectful. So to talk about matter of principle, that it really violates the ethic of respect that we're trying to teach, a way of peace and nonviolence. And then, but to really demonstrate that it doesn't work, we focus on the practical implications. When you strike back, when you try to come back with revenge, as normal, as natural as that may feel, it actually does not really help you out. And the way I do this is a demonstration. I just did this in a class at Goshen College just a couple days ago when I have someone assault me. And it ends up with a soft takedown, and I actually restrain the person on the floor, talk the person through, with my intent of I don't want to get hurt and I don't want to fight. And actually to help, once that person is giving me his word in this case, that it's not going to try to hit me again, I actually restore him. It seems counterintuitive. Why help the attacker? And when we talk about that as an exercise, you can see when you're restoring the person who is targeting, who is active aggressive, or who means to hurt and who harms you, you're actually creating a sense of wonder. You're creating a turn rather than continuing the cycle of where the violence escalates. Mm-hmm. So to actually demonstrate that by trying to respond in a way that's respectful, it's more likely to call forth more respectful response, and actually helping the individual up. And so we have a demonstration to actually try to help kids actually see how it's to your advantage not to act in a way to strike back or to commit revenge. And then another way we'd like to talk about revenge, we have an exercise based on Mahatma Gandhi's teaching that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And we have kids going to form a group where one pokes the eye of a student. He in turn pokes that student back. They go back and forth, and others in their groups join in, where in the end the entire group are blind except one guy has one eye left, the last person to do the poking. Just to demonstrate that if you're going to exact revenge, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, it leaves everyone blind and toothless. And so it's kind of a fun exercise, and to try to, when we do real life stories, talk about, okay, what were you feeling? If you're feeling scared, you're angry, you're wanting to strike back, okay, if you did that, what happened? And help them realize in their own lived experience or hypothetical role plays that we run, recognize to help where this is going to lead to greater aggression. And so what might begin with words ends up with fists, or it might lead to a knife or a stick, or more and more we're seeing gun violence. And so just to help the kids stop and realize that revenge, retaliation, actually leads to greater violence in their lives.
Yeah.
But they have to find something where they feel empowered. They're not simply turning the other cheek, walking away feeling as though they've lost, they've suffered a humiliation, their tail's between their legs. It's like Blake when he walked away in that one incident. He walked away with his chin up, taking the higher road, and there was a sense of empowerment that he was making the choice, that he wasn't acquiescing, nor was he striking back. And so it's really critical that kids feel like they have a choice, they're empowered to do something different. And if they don't know what to do differently, they're much more likely to strike back or to cower.
Yeah. It's interesting how innate this retaliation response is in children and all the way up through. And it's in the church, you see people that are passive aggressive in response, and they try to do things in a way that is roundabout or is it's an insidious issue for the human race. And I think as Christians, because it's so insidious and because it's so widespread, at what point do you teach or give space for the Spirit to be at work to bring transformation beyond what we can do ourselves? Because at points, for myself even, I feel it feels so frustrating sometimes that I just by default go into a retaliation mode sometimes. And for children the same way, and so to be able to say there's a power greater than us to help. Now, the power of community is one thing, and that's why I think to be in a gathering where there's a large group to see the power in community is another way of the power beyond ourselves. So I wonder, I guess, how you instill in some way the importance of, for we as Christians, the power of faith. For others, I don't know what other ways you couch that, I guess, but it just feels like it needs to have something more than just a stronger will.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the question, Merle. So we're teaching concepts, so they're kind of getting fundamental concepts, or kind of imparting knowledge. We are trying to teach specific skills, but we say as much or more important is who you are as kind of as a person, and to have peace within, so you can have peace with others. So our classes begin with a centering exercise, where we have a singing bowl that we ring, and it depends where we're doing this. In a school situation, we talk about this as being this could be a practice of calming down, be a kind of way of relaxing when you're all hyped up and you're adrenalized with fear or anger. This can be simply just a technique, but then I say if you're a person of faith like I am, this becomes a way of actually allowing God's Spirit to actually help us practice self-control when we're angry, to have courage in place of fear, to actually be more centered and grounded, allowing the Spirit to work through us. I can say that in the school. It's kind of from a confessional standpoint. It's not proselytizing, but using our centering exercise at the very beginning. And so then we often talk about how in martial arts we always train under a master, and where we can we say, for us, Jesus is our master in the way of peace. To actually teach us how to live with others in conflict, as he did. And to talk about that there's a spirit at work within all of us that actually makes us strong, loving, and wise, to use Paul's word to young Timothy. And to be able to orient kids, by our own kind of our lives and our own kind of witness, that it's not just about learning techniques, but it's really about following example and working with God's Spirit in our lives. So that centering exercise is the way that we do that at the beginning of the class.
Okay.
Someone's phone's ringing. What do you hope, Steve, from this curriculum or from this process of teaching? What's your dream?
I want kids to be able to go through life where they feel free rather than feeling scared and threatened, where they feel safe, where they feel respected, and where they actually treat others with respect. And so we're actually creating, wherever we are, a community, a peaceable community. And so at school, where kids are relating with others with respect, they're including all. They're not doing exclusion. And exclusion, by the way, is just another more cunning way of practicing bullying, and that can be just as much or more injurious than the physical bullying that you often associate with boys. And so to be able to actually create a culture of respect, which really forms the way of our culture of peace.
I love that. That's great.
And by doing this, I continue to have a problem with managing conflict in my own life, dealing with issues of anger. And so, as the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull taught me, teach what we most have to learn. And so, I like working with kids and doing this because it keeps me on that path. And so I see myself as being a good steward of a lot of bad experience and wanting kids to learn through the example of those of us who teach, so they don't have to go some of these painful experiences themselves. But in the end, experience and pain is the greatest teacher. But if we can help some kids avoid some of that and learn from each other, learn from us, that's what it's about.
Yeah. Well, I'm just very I'm just really excited about what you have going on here, and such an amazing resource that I wish it was in my own children's school district, or so I'm grateful to have my hands on this curriculum to be able to look at it. Is there any way that, I don't know, do you offer, let's just say, if people from our Gathering Place community would be interested in getting trained to be able to start sort of programs or opportunities like this in their own areas?
Well, for example, I was up at Kitchener-Waterloo. I've been up a couple times to do some things within their school, Conrad Grable, and their high school. And one of the things that we did over a weekend, we brought together some martial artists within the community who could get this, who they would have a vision or values for this. Brought together educators, social workers, and parents, and tried to say, bring together people who could be players to actually maybe shape their own program. And so, we left behind, our materials, and we did a workshop just to kind of get a sampling, just to help them connect and maybe see the possibilities and see what they can create. I don't know what's happening in that community now, but there was a fair amount of vision and energy at a certain point of trying to collaborate together, bringing people who had different skill sets together within the church community and the larger community who'd share this vision and actually design programs to work in their own context. And if there are ways that I could be helpful in that, I'm happy to be involved in that.
That's great. Well, thanks for all that you do, and I'm very grateful for the spirit that's alive and at work in your life that has empowered you to transform your own childhood into something that's benefited all of us. So I'm so grateful for that. Are there any last-minute words that you have, or Merle, that you want to ask Steve before we get off?
One thing, and this I think is another big piece, and maybe if you work with groups you do this, but how do you respond? I think of this for the church, for kids in the youth group. How do you empower the silent observer of bullying?
That's a good one.
How do you train or call them to, I wouldn't say account, but just to empower them to step in and not be that silent observer?
Well, we do role plays. We set up situations, and where we create the triangle, the bully, and the bystander. And then when we do a role play, we invite those who are on the outside who are observing. If they are the silent observer or bystander, or worse, when they're chanting fight, 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 and they're egging on, the bullying and to get into a fight, how they're actually participating, in this. So one, we teach them that if you are present, if you are there, you're in the role of a bystander, and you are responsible to contribute to what's happening in that moment by failing to do nothing. If you're simply silent, you actually then are party to the aggression. But then we say, okay, now what are some of the possibilities? And we talk about how it takes a lot of courage because there's risk. If you step forward, then you run the risk of being targeted. And so we talk about how there's strength in numbers. And so, for example, the Columbine tragedy, that's one of our common role plays. We'll replay the incident that was the break point that led these two individuals to strike back with the violence that they did. And with students in that cafeteria that time in 1999, what they could have done, what the teachers and other people who were present could have done but didn't do. So by role plays, we actually have the kids, rather than for us telling them, here's what you do, where it's highly scripted, we actually say, you can know and have that confidence. And as from a faith perspective, I like to think that it's the Spirit that actually gives wisdom and guidance and courage. and to have help them problem solve within themselves and among themselves of actually how to intervene. And so it's kind of fun to be able to do role play and actually have them step forward and speak and to engage. And then if they need some coaching, what not to do, what to do, we offer that on the side.
Important piece. I think it's and that's another broad-based issue as well.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, thank you so much for taking this hour to talk with us here and talk about bullying and, yeah, positive peacemaking ways in which to empower ourselves, empower our children, empower our youth to, yeah, to transform conflict in the best way possible. So, yeah, do you have any final words for us here?
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and again, I'm happy to pass along whatever materials, so you can post links to our materials. People can email me, call me, and I'm happy to provide whatever materials I can, or to come and to lead a workshop, or to think with you about how you can start something in your own community or congregation.
That's wonderful. We're so grateful for that, and yeah, we're very thankful again for what you do, and yeah, for how you're changing not only your community but the world as well. So thank you again, and until next time, goodbye.
Thank you.
All right, see you guys.